welcome to Riddle's channel. I'm back with another restoration video for you, and this time I thought it would be a great opportunity to include a Midge doll. And so I chose this 1992 Earring Magic Midge to be the next doll for a massive transformation. And while the doll itself is in really good condition, when you look at her hair, it's very clear that she needs some really good deep hair treatment. She still has her original earrings and ring, and she came with her original dress and most of her accessories, which I will get to later. You can also see some blue flakes on her legs, which are parts of the peeling pleather from her dress. If you look very closely, you can see that her lipstick is starting to peel and crack, so I look into ways to fix that. But first, let's start with the usual brushing out of the hair. As always, I like to use my white pet brush, which is really good at detangling super tangled dry kanekalon hair. So because of her hair is in such a dire condition, I do this very carefully and in very small sections, brushing the hair gently from the ends to the roots. As the hair is getting gradually brushed out, you can even notice some of her original crimps coming out. And with this doll in particular, I know that we cannot get rid of all of the knots in her hair, but what I want to do is to eliminate them as best as I can. So on top of the brushing, I will still use this fine-tooth comb to run it through her hair to see if I can ease out any really bad stubbornness. But essentially what she really needs is the boil wash, but it's always easier to do that when kanekalon hair is detangled in the beginning. And as always, I also brush her bangs, which are in just as bad as a condition as the rest of her hair. I truly can't wait to see her after we're done with the boil wash, so we can compare the condition of the hair before and after. Luckily her hair is rooted really well because she barely lost anything. This small amount is all the hair she lost. Now let's go ahead with the washing, and for that I'm gonna place her in this pail, add a dash of dishwashing liquid, and fill the pail with hot water. In her case I'm being very careful with the bangs because I don't want the water to push it back into her hair to make sure that it's nice and divided. Her hair also seems to repel the water because of how frizzy it is, so I have to help it a little bit and make it absorb the water better. Now that we're done, I'm just gonna let her soak for a couple of hours. And after that, I'll take an old toothbrush, and since she's not very dirty, I'll just lightly scrub her all over. For the dirtiest part, which are her feet, I'll switch to a sponge, which is a bit better at removing stubborn stains. And to avoid chipping her lips more, I'll just use the soft side of the sponge to wash her face. Then I'll add some shampoo to her hair and work it in really well to make sure that we clean out the kanekalon fibers as best as we can. Then I'll rinse out most of the shampoo and continue with adding a generous amount of conditioner. And once again, I'll just work it in really well. Then I'll take the fine-tooth comb and very gently, very carefully comb through the conditioned hair, starting from the ends and continuing to the roots. I do this until I feel that the comb is gliding through the hair with relative ease. Now I'll do the same with the bangs, and since I accidentally pulled out a couple of hair strands, I'll just cut them off at this point. Next, I'll prepare the boil wash, for which, as always, I boiled some water in an electric kettle and left it to cool down below 90 degrees Celsius, which is best when you work with kanekalon hair. At first, I dipped her bangs just to make sure they stay isolated throughout the whole process and that it'll be easier to work with them later. And you can probably see how much better they already look. After that, I dip the rest of her hair and swirl it around in the hot water before I add some combing on top of it. In her case, I need to do 2 rounds of boil wash because of the condition of her hair. So I refilled the glass with more hot water and just repeated the same steps again. I find that combing kanekalon hair when you pull it out of the hot water really helps with making it shiny, and it fixes all the frizz and damage that has been caused by a lot of playing and a lot of brushing. To finalize this process, I like to comb the hair a little bit more under some cold running water, which I found that it helps retain the shine and soft feel of the hair which we achieved with the boil wash. It also helps remove all the excess conditioner, and at this point it's also good to wash the doll completely. And as you can see, the hair looks so much better than what it did before, and I can't wait to see the final results. But before we move on, I want to first curl her bangs and get that out of the way. So I like to use a modified version of the straw method, and if you're interested in knowing all of the details of how I do this, I will leave a link below in the description to a restoration video I did on Hula Hair Barbie, where this process is explained in more details. But the basic idea is that I place a straw under the bangs, pour some hot water on top of it, and then use a comb to guide the bangs into the shape that I want them to be. And then I just repeat this process until I'm happy with the shape. After the curling is completed, I go ahead and dry the bangs using a hairdryer on a low heat setting. When using a blow dryer on a doll, I always make sure to keep some distance from the hair, because if the air is too hot, it could potentially damage or frizz up the hair, which we don't want, of course. But in general, you should be able to keep your hand on the doll's hair while you blow dry it to know that the air is not too hot. While this method does take more time and effort, I personally found that it yielded much better results, and I'm much happier with how the bangs look after putting a bit of extra effort into it. Next, I would like to show you how I crimp kanekalon doll hair. Before doing that, however, I'm gonna section off the front part of her hair to better recreate her original look. Now, before I move on, I want to say that I absolutely recommend to have heat tools with adjustable heat settings if you want to curl or crimp doll hair. However, my crimper does not have heat settings, and so I will show you how to use it in a safe way. But again, if you can get a heat tool with adjustable settings, it's much easier and you don't really have to pay attention so much to what I'm about to show you. But just know that it is possible to use simple heat tools. You just have to be more careful. Now, as I happen to have her original hairband on me, I'm just gonna add it to her front ponytail already at this point. Now, the last thing I want to do is to section her hair into smaller pieces and keep the pieces I'm not working with right now out of the way. I like to start from the bottom of the hair, so that's where I'm going to keep a small section to be worked with. And here is my crimper, which, as I said, it has no heat settings. It only has an on and off button. I also brought a kitchen thermometer with me and a kitchen timer to give you a better idea of how much time has to pass until my crimper is ready to be used. Now this is just informative, as every crimper might be different, but the basic idea is that you want to work with temperatures from 120 to 140 degrees Celsius. Anything hotter than that can melt the kanekalon hair. So as you can see, it took about 5 minutes to get my crimper to 120 degrees Celsius, which I will now turn off and leave aside until I prepare the hair for the crimping process. The most crucial part here is to spray the hair with a lot of water. So have a spray bottle with water ready at all times. You can also use a heat protectant, as I am using here, which will result in a crisper crimp effect at the end, but it's not necessary. So I crimp very small sections of the hair, and I always first test on an area that's not visible to see if the crimper is hot enough. This time it was not hot enough, so I turned it on for a couple of more minutes. And then once it's ready, I crimp the hairpiece from the roots down to the ends. And that's pretty much it. I just continue taking another small section of the hair, making sure it's really wet and making sure that the crimper is hot enough but not too hot. And of course, another important thing is that every time I put the crimper down, I turn it on, and before I crimp the hair, I turn it off. This way, I can usually keep it around the right temperature to be able to make nice crimps but not burn the hair. Now when you're crimping doll hair, you might notice that you get a lot of sizzling sounds and some steam. People might sometimes get scared that this is smoke and that they're burning the hair, but that's really just the vapor that's being evaporated from the wet hair by the crimper. And as for how long I keep the hair clamped inside the crimper, it actually depends on the intensity of the sizzling sounds and the vapor. If the sizzling is very strong and the vapor gushes out immediately, I keep the crimper closed for maybe 2 to 5 seconds. If the sizzling is milder and the vapor comes out gradually, I keep the crimper shut for 5 to 10 seconds. Again, this kind of depends on your own hair crimper, so I highly recommend that you first try it on a doll that you don't care about to find out how your crimper works. But to summarize, if you have a crimper with heat settings, use the lowest setting possible, ideally 120 to 140 degrees Celsius. If your crimper doesn't support that, then you have to play with turning it on and off by kind of figuring yourself out how exactly it works and how long it takes to heat up. However, regardless of the crimper, always wet the kanekalon hair, because this will prevent it from being melted. The crimping process also usually almost entirely dries up the hair, so you only need to wait a little longer for it to be completely dry. Now, since I'm using a heat protectant spray, I just lightly wash the doll with some water and dry it off with a towel. Also, I don't usually brush through the crimps anymore because the crimps kind of disappeared and the hair got too poofy. So nowadays I mostly just divide the individual strands and then maybe just lightly comb through it. And here is her pleather dress, which is all cracked and peeling. And if you know me, you know that I'll try and save it. So the method I want to try is to seal the peeling pleather with fabric glue. And for this I'm using fabric glue that I know dries completely transparent and doesn't feel too tacky. So first I put this dress on a headless doll just to be able to work with it easier. And I also wrapped the doll's body in some plastic wrap to make sure that I don't accidentally glue the dress to the body in case the glue seeps through the cracks and through the textile. So to test it, I'm first only going to cover the backside of the dress, which is not very visible, in case something goes wrong. And now I will wait for about a day until this dries. And here we are the next day, once the glue has dried. As you can see, the cracks are a bit more visible. However, the pleather is actually really sealed and it's not flaky as much. So now I'm just gonna apply it to the rest of the dress. But first I need to get this belt out of the way because it's a little bit annoying to work with. So as I did before, I'm just gonna apply a very thin layer of this fabric glue directly onto the pleather to seal in the pieces and to prevent it from peeling further. I'm trying to be really gentle here, not to cause even more cracking and peeling, and to make sure that the dress is evenly coated throughout. And again, as the glue is slowly drying, I can see that the cracks are becoming more visible. But for now, I just want to see if it's possible to save the pleather in any way. Another thing I wanted to test is whether it's possible to keep a doll stand on the dress without the pleather sticking to it. And unfortunately, at least with this metal stand, I can clearly see that even gluing the pleather is not preventing it from sticking to other surfaces. However, when manipulating the doll, the pleather is holding in place, it's not shedding at all, and it's not sticking to the hand anymore. Therefore, I want to put another layer of the glue, and this time I want to add some fabric paint to see if I can cover up the cracks a little bit. For the ratio, I'm aiming for it to be about 1:1. The reason I'm using fabric glue and fabric paint is because they are both very flexible and soft and should not cause the dress to be stiff once it dries up. And once that's mixed up, I'm just gonna do the same I did with the glue and apply very thin layers of it throughout the whole dress. I really want to make sure that I work it in really well into all of the cracks to make sure that they are nice and covered. I also pay extra attention around the seams and parts that hold the Velcro. After a couple of days, this is how the dress looks. And I'm actually really liking the result so far, so I decided to put another layer of the fabric glue and fabric paint mixture. Again, I'm gonna do a 1:1 ratio and apply a very thin layer, which I work in with the brush very thoroughly. Now, if you don't mind seeing the cracks in the pleather, you can absolutely just use the glue itself, and it will be enough to preserve the original pleather as it is. However, I wanted to add some of the paint to see if we can get a more even finish. And I'll just let this dress dry for a couple of days. Now I'm back after actually a couple of weeks, and I waited a longer time because the dress, even though it's dry, it's really sticky and tacky, and I wanted to see if this disappears by time. However, it doesn't seem to be going away, so I decided to add some baby powder to see if I can get rid of the stickiness. So all I'm gonna do here is just apply a thin layer of baby powder with a brush and just make sure that the entire dress is covered and that the layer of the baby powder is even. Touching it, I can tell that it's really working. However, it is rubbing off a bit of the powder, so I'll just use a couple of damp cotton pads to wipe off any excess powder. After this, the dress is still a little bit tacky, so I'm just gonna do another round of the baby powder and see if I can improve it even more. I also decided to actually rub it in directly with my fingers. However, this is causing the baby powder to go very deep into the cracks, so I'm not sure that this was a good idea. But anyway, I'll wipe off the excess powder with some damp cotton pads and then use a dry one to dry up the dress and see if I can remove any of the nested powder. However, that is not coming out, but the dress is now not sticky at all, and the pleather seems to be holding really well, even if I really try to stretch the dress a lot. So all in all, this method seems to be working really well. It does help keep the peeling pleather in place, but it might emphasize the cracks, so you can add a bit of fabric paint to combat that. Of course, this will cause some discoloration on the inside part of the dress, however that I don't mind at all. And of course, some of the seams might be also glued to the inside of the dress, but they should be easily detachable. And of course, some of the old peeling pleather will be in between the old seams. Now this dress is almost ready, but I still have to fix this tiny tear on the left sleeve. After some careful examination, I figured that this is an easy fix that will only require a needle and some thread. so I'll just use a simple threading technique to close the open part of the sleeve and make sure it doesn't come apart again. Since this fabric is very delicate, I'm not applying too much force when guiding the thread through the fabric. And at the end, I just close it with 2 simple knots. One at the end and one closer to the middle, just to make sure that the stitching is a little bit more secure. The sleeve is now fixed. And voila! The dress is now ready to be put on the doll. But before the final reveal, we still have a little bit of work to do, and that's saving her chipping lips. For that, I'm just gonna use some basic acrylic paint, which is water-based, so I can dilute it a little bit more with water. I really only need a tiny amount of it, so I'm gonna be using a very tiny brush and add just a couple of drops of water at a time until I get a very smooth and light consistency. Then I'm gonna very carefully apply the paint onto her lips with a very small paintbrush. I apologize for the blurriness of this footage. Unfortunately, my camera didn't want to cooperate with me, but I think you're able to see what I'm doing here. All in all, I'm trying to keep the lips to be nice and uniform and symmetrical on both sides. And that looks good enough to me, so she's ready to go. And the time has finally come for the big reveal. Here's Earring Magic Midge restored. And I'm beyond excited with how she turned out. The crimps turned out fantastic, and her wild hair has been tamed. I added the original charms that she came with. Although she was missing her original earring hoops, I added these silver ones, which still work with her overall look. And to complete the look, I gave her these blue 90s pumps. And now to compare, here's a quick side-by-side of the doll before and after the restoration. Doesn't she look gorgeous now? The Earring Magic line is truly such an iconic throwback to the early 90s, and I'm so happy that I was able to prolong the life of her dress a bit more. But now I want to hear your opinions. What do you think about these results? Do you like this method of saving pleather dresses? Or do you know of any better ones? As always, feel free to share your thoughts with me. But for now, thank you so much again for watching this video, and I want to wish you all a wonderful day.